Hello and welcome to this Hudson Institute event on the discussions, I should say, on the future of US climate policy. I'm Nate Sibley. I'm a research fellow here at Hudson, and I usually focus on issues like corruption, kleptocracy, illicit finance. But today, as I said, we'll be talking about the future of the planet. And joining me to do so is someone who also does a lot of work on kleptocracy, but arguably his main sort of policy interest is climate change, and that is Congressman John Curtis, and who has been the US representative for Utah's 3rd district since 2017. For our purposes today, he sits on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. He's also the chairman of the newly launched Conservative Climate Caucus, which was announced back in June, and I look forward to talking about that with you. So welcome back, Congressman. We had a discussion with you and 2 MPs from Canada and from the UK back in, I think it was March, just talking about sort of how conservatives are sort of changing their approach to climate issues. A lot has happened since then. You've been over at COP26, and so it's great to sort of catch up with you. So welcome back to Hudson. And I wonder if maybe just to recap, though, we could sort of begin because if you look at the polls and things, for the majority of conservative voters, climate maybe doesn't feature as maybe one of the top sort of issues still that they're concerned about. So as a Republican congressman, what brought you to this issue, and why are you so focused on climate change?
Well, it's of course an important question and hard to answer because it wasn't like a one instant where I wasn't interested and then became interested. It really has been a growing concern of mine that Republicans have because of our silence, have allowed ourselves to be branded as not caring or somehow denying the science. And that's really just not true. We just are turned off by the current approach and the current dialogue on it. So the more I studied it, the more I realized, boy, we've got some powerful conservative answers here that are very good for our planet and the Earth. As a matter of fact, I think far better than many of the ideas that are out there. And darn it, we need to articulate those. We need to kind of come off the bench and get a seat at the climate table. So
you've launched this new caucus. It's actually, I think I was reading one of the biggest Republican caucuses, right? Can you tell us a bit about the caucus, what it does, and what your hopes for it are?
It is. So we launched it just several months ago, and within just a couple of weeks, we had over the 1/3 of the entire House of Representatives, Republicans, join the caucus, which stunned everybody. Nobody thought that many Republicans wanted to talk about the climate, and we're prepared to hit head on, right, the difficult questions. And the purpose of the caucus is clearly to educate our members and get them ready for these climate discussions, and to make sure that every Republican, when asked, knows how to answer the questions, and not only knows how to answer the questions, but is ready with a list of things that they're doing and initiatives that they're pursuing and want to pursue. And boy, if we can do that, it'll be so important to the whole climate dialogue, because for the most part, Republicans have just kind of stayed away from the debate right now.
And it's not just, what you might term sort of maybe the more moderate side of the Republican conference. You have people like Dan Crenshaw on there. He even traveled to Glasgow with you as part of the first GOP delegation to COP. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in some of the pubs when he was talking to sort of all the usual people you find around these events, like Greenpeace and so on and so forth. I'm sure that was great fun. But you've got a real spread of members, which is fantastic.
We do. We have, I just might mention, we have 5 or 6 or more ranking members of the committees of jurisdiction. We've got members of the Freedom Caucus. We've got members right all over. They all have an interest in this and want to promote good conservative ideas. And it's a lot of fun to be associated with them.
We can get onto what some of those ideas might be a bit later on. But I want to start off, as we mentioned, you were at COP26. First GOP delegation ever to attend. From your point of view, you went to all the sort of fringe events. You were very much in the thick of it. We're a couple of weeks away now from the outcome, the Glasgow Climate Pact, I think it was called, right? To your mind, was COP26 a success? Was it a failure, or was it more of a mixed picture?
Well, I think if you look at COP overall, you have to be very discouraged, right? The fact that we've now done this for 26 years and we've really not made the progress that people expect us to make. If you go back to the Paris Accords, you can see that countries will come and pretty well say anything to get the pats on the back and to get the commitments, and then walk away and really do whatever they want. And that's got to be of great concern. to us in America, because quite frankly, we're far closer to being on track than any other country with those Paris Accord agreements.
Do you think it ever can be the UN framework process, the COP process? I mean, is there a moment in time when we'll ever get to see legally binding commitments on reductions or anything else for that matter, backed up by enforcement mechanisms? What would you like to see COP do in that respect?
Well, let me tell you, I don't know, COP can be instrumental in helping us unite and have a common dialogue. But if we want to really face the facts, right, if we want to follow the science, we've got to admit that we have a serious problem with China, with Russia, and India. I hate to put India in that group because they're in a different category as far as our friends. But the reality of it is we can do all we want all day long. We can get US emissions to zero, and we'll fail if we can't find a way to motivate some of these bad actors. And that was the problem with the Paris Accord. As you know, it allowed China to continue increasing pollutions for the next 20 years. Well, that's not acceptable if we're asking US businesses to sacrifice, if we're losing US jobs over this. That's in no way acceptable.
I guess the Belt and Road Initiative and China's now sort of, it's Xi Jinping is committed to not to export, coal production anymore. But this stuff is all in place now, right? China has a real, even if it genuinely wanted to, China has a serious task on its hand to wind this stuff back.
It does. And I think I know at least some of the answers to that. And that's why conservatives are needed at the table, is I don't think the other side is really dealing with that realistically. And unless we make substantial progress there, we can't reach our climate goals.
Well, that's an interesting point. So how would you sort of rate the Biden team's approach to global climate issues, and particularly in the run-up to COP26? I don't want to sort of ask a leading question, put words in your mouth, but to me it seemed at times like John Kerry was effectively running his own foreign policy and conflating climate with issues like human rights in China and so on, and really confusing the issue, a lot of other sort of foreign policy areas for the US. Was that your impression, or do you think they've done well, or how do you view it?
Listen, it's hard to say they've done well. We've made really zero progress on this with our neighbors across the ocean, and particularly the largest polluters. And they've proven and continue to prove that they'll do what's in their best interest. And if it's in their best interest to come and make, kind of flimsy commitments for, decades and decades and decades after everybody else is going to do it, then that's not real progress at all. And we've got to really get serious about what will motivate them and what will make them change.
So just sticking with the global approach for a moment, you mentioned you had some ideas about how we might better hold countries like China and the other major polluters to account and work with those who want to reduce their emissions. What would sort of what would a conservative approach, what would your preferred approach be to sort of US global climate policy?
I'm smiling because I love the conservative approach, because as a conservative, we tend to think we can be far more effective with a conservative approach. And let me give you a really good example. We can go to COP for 26 years and we can say, China, you need to do this, or you need to do that. And we'll come back the next year and find out they haven't done it. But if we apply a conservative approach, what does that tell us? It tells us that we need to provide China with a low-cost alternative that is green. That will change China. That will we can count on China following if it's in their economic best interest. So what could that be, hypothetically? Well, let's just suppose that the United States implements the next generation nuclear and continues to perfect that the way that we do everything else and iterate and get the price for nuclear to be less than their current sources. You bet China will adopt that and accept that. Let's suppose that the United States perfects carbon sequestration and direct air capture, right? These are the types of things that if we can make them the low-cost alternative for China. Right now, they're going with coal because it's the low-cost alternative, right? And they don't care about how much it pollutes. So we've got to put good old U.S. innovation to work, allow the free market and capital to invest, and find the systems and deliver those systems that will be the low-cost provider to China, and they will follow so fast it'll make our head spins. But that's the only way you're really going to force China to do anything.
It sounds, you talk about forcing China, but it sounds like you're almost maybe like a collaborative approach there. Like, would this involve trading with China on this stuff, or
Well, certainly it
providing
does.
it as assistance, or what?
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as this. China will implement the low-cost alternative. If we have that low-cost alternative, we're in the driver's seat, and we can work out the trade agreements and things like that. But and I am absolutely convinced the United States can innovate our way into the low-cost option for them. And we can already do it today with natural gas. Natural gas is already the low-cost option for China. But what are we doing? We're shutting down pipelines. We're prohibiting the exporting that over to China. So we already have the solution right now if we would just put it to work. You know, if we sent U.S. natural gas over to China, we could reduce more greenhouse gas emissions than implementing the entire Green New Deal combined. And yet we're closing the door to that option.
You sort of already started to answer this, but I guess switching maybe more to sort of a domestic focus and that side of US climate policy. Why you often, one of the things I notice about you and maybe some of the other members of the Climate Caucus like to talk a lot more about maybe those on the more alarmist end of the scale, about the extent to which the US, as you say, has already driven down its emissions to a truly like pretty astonishing extent. You know, more in absolute numbers than any other country, I think, or more than like the next 12 countries combined or something.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Why was it able to do that?
Well,
you know, what are your thoughts about that?
So we need to be talking about this more as conservatives and shouting this from the housetops. We've reduced U.S. greenhouse gas emissions more over the last decade than a dozen greenhouse gas emitting countries combined. And yet there's still people shouting from the sidelines that we should be shamed. We can do better. Certainly we can do better, but somebody needs to stop and acknowledge that we're making tremendous progress. And then if you ask, well, how did we make that progress? The answer is we used fossil fuels. Shocker, right? Like fossil fuels are being demonized and shut down at a rapid rate. Natural gas has led to substantial reductions in US greenhouse gas emissions, and we could do the same thing with US natural gas worldwide and make the same type of progress overseas if we would stop demonizing natural gas, fossil fuels, and simply change the question to this. What reduces worldwide greenhouse gas emissions? Not how can we demonize fossil fuels? And when we ask the question, what reduces worldwide greenhouse gas emissions? Natural gas is part of that, as is US natural gas, because we're so much cleaner than everybody else.
Why do you think this sort of almost sort of a false debate has grown up in the minds of many, you know, about particularly the environmental movement? You know, when there is a struggle in their minds clearly between environmental concerns. So when you build a pipeline, perhaps you're doing it over a national park or something, versus, you know, the benefits that you just elucidated about, the kinds of you know, emissions reductions that we can achieve by embracing this technology. Why are they so sort of conflicted over that, and why has this sort of like become a big cultural sort of battle between the right and the left?
I can only speculate, but let me tell you what my guess is, and that is that they have it in for fossil fuels, and they don't. It's not about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's about killing and demonizing fossil fuels. Let me give you a perfect example. So President Biden shuts down the Keystone Pipeline, which was a green pipeline, right? Mm-hmm. And oh boy, that feels good, right? If you're environmentalist, oh, that feels good. I shut down a pipeline. Well, now let's look at reality. Reality is they've done nothing to change demand. The US is still going to use that oil. Now we're trucking it in from Canada, or we're buying it from Venezuela and Russia. President Biden shut down Keystone Pipeline and then had the audacity to pick up the phone and call Russia and ask them to produce more oil for us. Clearly a dirtier source, right? More pollution from our enemy. We've worked for decades to become energy independent. And the second we do, they're ready to shut that down and go buy dirty oil from somebody else. I'm willing to have that conversation about what can we do to improve fossil fuels, greenhouse gas emissions, which ones have less. We need carbon sequestration, we need direct air capture. But let's be honest, it's about greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, not about the feeling good that you get when you shut down a pipeline.
Talking about some more recent developments then. You voted against the new Infrastructure Act, I think I saw earlier.
That's correct, yeah.
And that had around $120 billion of what at least its proponents said were climate-related provisions in. So can you explain a bit about your decision to vote against that? What was in it that maybe you liked? What was in it that you didn't like and caused you to vote against it?
Well, we need an hour for that discussion.
Sorry, these are all big questions, of course.
I'll give you the short version.
So I'm grateful for your being able to summarize things.
From the beginning, the president and Nancy Pelosi said this was linked to the reconciliation bill, that they wouldn't pass one without the other, which effectively in the House just wiped out Republicans' ability to support that. Second, Republicans in the House were given no opportunity to offer amendments to change that bill in the slightest. Our Republican colleagues were given that opportunity in the Senate, but not in the House. There are a lot of opportunities, I think, that we would have had to improve that bill and make that a better bill that we could support. But A, because it was tied to reconciliation, and B, because we were not consulted at all and just asked to support it, it became impossible for me to support. Now, let's admit it. If you're going to spend $1.2 trillion, you're going to find a few things you like in there, right? Which is basically what they did. Let's put something in for everybody. But let me tell you what was missing both from that and the Build Back Better bill that we passed last week was a comprehensive plan to reduce worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. Instead, what you saw was everybody's favorite project. So let me give you an example. Let's put charging stations on freeways. Okay, that sounds really good. But wait a minute. We don't have the grid to deliver the power to those charging stations. And oh, wait a minute, we don't have the power to put on the grid to deliver to those charging stations. So that's what I mean by, like, we need a comprehensive plan that works together, not just these isolated feel good, oh, let's do this because it feels good. Let's go spend hundreds of billions of dollars, but it doesn't point us in the direction of our end goal. What is our end goal? Reduce worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. I've never heard President Biden state that as the end goal, but anything less than that is not really accomplishing our climate objectives.
So how would we sort of talked a bit about what you would do on the international front, maybe, promoting nuclear carbon capture technologies as a way to sort of entice China, in its own interest to reduce its emissions. What would you do to, as if thinking of a future Republican administration, a Republican Congress, if you were they turned to you and said, what should we do, Representative Curtis, on the domestic front to keep driving down our emissions? What would you recommend? I'd
love to be king for a day. And this is what I would do. I'd have a 3-tiered focus. One is on renewables. I think sometimes conservatives discount renewables. They're an important part of this mix, but they have a fatal flaw, and that's storage. All right. And so I double down on storage, whether it doesn't all have to be batteries. Hydrogen can be a great storage vehicle. So that's tier number one, is double down on storage so that renewables can be all that they need to be. The second tier is what I would call emerging or developing technologies. Let me put some items in that category for you. New nuclear, hydrogen, fusion. There's a number of things that in that category that will be game changers and will also be base load, which renewables without storage are not. And I think that we've got to double down on all of those as well. And then the third category is fossil fuels. And we've talked a little bit about that. And for fossil fuels to be everything that we want them to be, we do need direct air capture. We need carbon sequestration. So I would double down on that as well. Those 3 categories come together for a comprehensive approach that will make a worldwide difference with greenhouse gas emissions. But what's happening is over on the Democrat side, we're only focusing on the renewables, and we don't have the storage. So they want to electrify everything. They want to put charging stations everywhere. We currently, you cannot get there with windmills and solar farms. You just cannot get there, right? We've got to have the storage component, but then even with storage, it's still, we have 800 million people on the earth without electricity. The growing need for electricity far surpasses our ability to deliver that with solar panels and windmills. So we've got to have these other categories that I've talked about. That's what I would do if I could be king for a day.
Just quickly before we sort of wrap up, what are some of the bills that you have introduced relating to climate? So we sort of get an idea of a taster, if we will, of if you were king for a day, I know you've brought out a couple of bills that are sort of very focused on climate.
Yeah, and let me tell you the bill I haven't introduced that I want to introduce that I think is one of the most important, and that is a methane bill. I think Republicans need to step up to the table on this and join our Democratic colleagues. Natural gas can only be all that we want it to be if we do a better job of capturing methane. So I'd like to try to find a path forward on that. I've got a bill on battery storage because here again, that's very important. I co-chair of the battery storage caucus. We've got a bill on methane reductions in agriculture that we like. There's a number of things that we're working on, and really are looking for both my Republican colleagues and Democratic colleagues who will join us in working together on things that we can agree are important and fit the conservative model that we're trying to achieve.
Fantastic. I mean, so we talked about if you were sort of king for a day, and if there was a climate-friendly Republican administration and climate-friendly congressional leadership who are also Republican. But for that to sort of happen realistically, there does need to be, perhaps you disagree, but I sort of feel there does have to be a bit more of a shift amongst conservatives to sort of caring about this issue and seeing it in terms that would appeal to them. So I guess on the sort of political, sort of cultural even front, how you're clearly, I think, the congressional leader on this, but how are you trying to reach out to conservative voters and engage them on this and show them these different sorts of approaches that you've been talking about?
Well, I think the most important thing to do is to get away from the rhetoric that turns them off, to get away from the litmus test of is the climate changing, right? And to appeal to their, I believe, this innate sense in every single one of us to leave the earth better than we found it. And if I stand up in a town hall meeting in rural Utah and I say, who wants to talk climate change? I may not make it to the end of that town hall meeting. But if I stand up and I say, look, who wants to leave this earth and your farmland and your ranches better for the next generation, then you found it. Every single one of them will join me in that. So conservatives at heart are very in tune with the earth, with leaving it better than we found it, but I think have been turned off by the rhetoric, by the extremism. And so kind of peeling that aside and just going right straight for the heart, which is, yes, we want to leave this earth better than we found it. And we've got work to do that. And I think that's what Republicans can connect with. And then the second piece of that is showing them how there are conservative answers that don't break the bank, that don't enlarge the size of government, and are actually better for the environment than some of the ideas that are out there. Those two things, I think, are a powerful combination. And I think that's why we have over a third of the entire House, of Republican House, who have joined the caucus, is they want to be part of that conversation. They want to be part of the answers. They want to show their kids that they do care deeply about this earth, and that they'll follow the science. But if we're going to follow the science, you got to follow it all the way, and not just have it be a convenient thing for you. So that's my goal. That's what we're trying to do with the caucus, and so far I think we're making really good progress.
Well, thank you for all your efforts on that front. I think everyone can agree that it is better to have both sides engaged and debating about the best way to solve a problem rather than whether the problem exists at all. I think hopefully we're moving past that stage, and that is no small thanks to you. So thank you for your time as well, joining us at Hudson Institute again today. I know how busy you must be, and we look forward to having you back again soon, hopefully.
Thanks, Nate. I look forward to it, and I can't end this without giving a shout out to so many. You're kind to give me credit, but there are so many in the conservative movement that are working hard on this, that have worked hard, that have taken arrows before I came along on this, so that my path could be perhaps a little bit easier. So I'm grateful for everybody that's engaged.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'll see you again next time.
Okay, best to you.